Well, hello everybody, it's Melanie. Today I'm going to show you how I took a $10 furniture find and turned it into something unique. Stay tuned. When I saw this ad on OfferUp, I had to check it out.
Uh-oh, we're going in the truck. You know what that means.
Well, it appears to be some sort of dressing table, a stack of 3 drawers flanked by 2 smaller armoires. The frame is solid wood, however the tops and the bottoms are made out of particle board, which will definitely need to be replaced. First things first, let's dive right into taking this thing apart and removing all that unwanted stuff.
I think I'll do it on my way. I'm gonna show you what I'm going through, get you out of your comfort zone, 'cause I need more of the truth right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking.
Since the 2 cabinets are now separated and no longer sharing a set of legs, I just cut a 2x4 to the same height as the legs for the additional pair, and some slats, which are now going to be the bottom. Well, this cabinet now has a wood bottom. First thing I did was get the decorative legs and trace them in front instead of the sides now, exactly where I want them to be. Then I drilled in some pilot holes for the screws, and then screwed the legs in from the underside. Using some 2-inch brads and my 18-gauge brad nailer, I attached the new bottom by first placing a generous amount of wood glue and then just tacking it down. Once the new bottom was in place, you can see a definite distinction between the old and the new wood, so I placed a piece of trim over. A little shortcut I like to take if I know I'm going to be painting the piece is to cut my trim just slightly longer and overlap, and then I trim it as close as possible with a handsaw and sand the curvature to the curvature of the trim to blend. If you're not as comfortable using a power sander for this part, you can always just do it by hand with some sandpaper. Once I'm done, I always take a little bit of fine grit sandpaper just to smooth it out as much as possible. Trust me, once this is all nice and painted up, it looks just as nice as a perfect mitered cut. Moving on to some repair work, I prefer to use all-purpose Bondo, which consists of 2 parts, the material and a hardener, which you have to mix in thoroughly. I use it to fill in any kind of large gouges I might have. It sets up really quickly in about 5 to 10 minutes depending on your temperatures. When using this product, it is always better to overfill than to underfill. Here it is once it's set up. I immediately use a curved file to try to get off as much of excess material as possible right away, and then I smooth it out with my sander. I find that if you let this set up too long, it's really hard to use a file with. Do you remember that gross broken particle board top? Well, that was replaced with some 1/4-inch plywood I had on hand. I simply cut it to shape, placed down a lot of wood glue, and then tacked it in place once again with my 18-gauge brad nailer. The door inserts were also made out of particle board, so that got removed. And I went ahead and did some Bondo repairs where necessary. Remember how these were originally 2 small armoires? I decided not to place that bar back inside and instead put a shelf right in the middle. For this, I attached a couple support boards directly across from where the other support originally was, cut out a piece of 1/4-inch plywood again and tack that into place. If you notice that this wood is just a little bit discolored, well, it started to rain and I had to bring everything in pretty quickly. A piece of trim was added to the front part of the shelf to make it look just a little more finished and to match the bottom parts. To cover up all those brad nail holes, I just use a little bit of Elmer's wood filler. Since I decided the inside would be a solid white, I took the easy route and used some leftover cabinet paint I had on hand inside my critter sprayer. I was able to get into all the nooks and crannies really easily, and I got complete coverage with about 2.5 coats of Rust-Oleum cabinet paint. Now moving on to the painting parts, I started off with a base coat of Country Chic Buttercream paint. I decided to kind of challenge myself and try to use up some leftover materials that I've had on hand for a long time. This is not bad paint by any means. However, it's just a color that I don't reach for, so I figured it would be great to just use it for undercoats. Here's what it looks like after one coat of yellow paint. It's not completely opaque and that's fine. So for the second layer I decided, hey, let's try adding a little bit of texture. Here's a little bit of generic texture medium I had made from a recipe a long time ago. What I did is just put a little bit of paint onto a paper plate and just eyeballed it until it got to the right consistency that I thought was appropriate. I made sure and used a old chip brush because this stuff will mess up any kind of your good paint brushes. Once it got thick enough where I knew it would stand up in place, I just simply applied it by stippling anywhere I wanted a little bit of texture. What's kind of cool about adding a texture medium is if you have any kind of flaws in your project, any kind of little cracks and grooves, this stuff will fill it in, and it adds a little bit of strength as well. So any kind of seams I had in place, any kind of little cracks, I simply put the texture medium over and I was hoping to get a really cool effect. As you continue to use it, it does tend to get a little thicker, so if you find that your texture medium gets too thick on you, just add a little bit of extra paint. I let it completely dry overnight and this is what it looked like in the morning. Look at all that yummy texture. So cool. The second color started off as a major fail, but I will show you guys anyways. I started off with Sweetie Jane from Sweet Pickins Milk Paint. It's a color I don't reach for very often, but like I said, I was trying to use up some of my older materials. I simply mixed it 50-50 warm water to milk paint and applied it here. I was hoping, against my better judgment, that I would get some chippy effects. However, this is what happened instead. That texture medium underneath sucked in all of that milk paint and left it very blotchy. No chips. I figure if it's not going to chip, why bother using milk paint anyways? My solution to this was DIY paint in Apothecary, which was a similar color. It is so rich and thick that it covered in just one coat. Once it was completely dry, which didn't take long at all, I sanded down the entire piece with 220 grit sandpaper, revealing all that texture and layered color underneath. Now to just add a little bit of character and give it kind of an old world look, I decided to use a scraper and distress the corners and some of the edges down to the bare wood. The entire piece got a coat of clear wax to seal it. I went ahead and chose clear wax instead of a hard sealer because I liked the natural finish it gives, and I didn't necessarily need the added protection a hard sealer would give. This is one of those pieces where if it gets bumped around or it gets a little bit of age, it's just only going to add to the character of it. After the clear wax was given sufficient time to dry, I noticed that my paint just looked a little brighter than I liked, so I decided to go over all that with some white wax to give it more of an old world oxidative look. Simply work in the wax really well into all those grooves and then lightly buff off the excess. This wax settled into all the low spots and gave the overall piece just a slightly cooler tone. This DIY wax is hands down my favorite wax to use. It has absolutely no smell, it's made with natural ingredients, and has a super creamy consistency which makes it really easy to use. The cabinet door got a nice little facelift thanks to some hardware cloth and the help of my cordless stapler. For the hardware, I went through a box of knobs I had and picked out a few singles. This was option 1, a white kind of farmhouse knob. Option 2, I had a copper knob. And for the third option was this more ornate knob, which my husband and my son liked the best. I used the keyhole for the bottom part of the knob and just had to drill a top hole to put in place. Well, the screws in the top latch were a galvanized steel that just looked a little too new, so I decided to try to grunge it up with some wax. I tried out this bronze gilding wax for the very first time and was super impressed. It not only gave the galvanized steel a more aged look, but I went ahead and added it to the corners of the door and around the handle and any kind of edges that would have had natural distress. I simply applied it where I wanted it to go with an artist brush and then diffused it with my finger to kind of blend it in. I have to say this wax was really awesome. It was easier to use than any kind of aging dust I've ever used before. Unlike a black wax that can sometimes look a little too dark and a dark wax which can sometimes look kind of gross, this didn't do that. And it gave it a slight sheen which I absolutely loved. I was also impressed with how far this product stretches. To do this entire piece, I only used about half of what was on the top of the lid. And just like that, this project was finished.
I try this a new way. I'm gonna show you the tricks that I know. I'm getting tired of talking, and I need more of a show right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking